The wind cut across the training ground as a Morris CS8 lurched through ruts that looked deep enough to swallow a man whole. Its narrow tracks and tall stance made it dance awkwardly over frozen earth. Yet it kept moving with the stubborn persistence of a draft horse bred for bad weather. Crews clung to its sides because they trusted its simple ladder chassis more than the road beneath them. Under the bonnet, the six-cylinder petrol engine hammered out its steady rhythm, indifferent to the cold that numbed fingers and stiffened canvas tilts. It wasn't the prettiest thing on wheels, but it carried rations, men and radio sets to places nothing else could reach. Even the sergeant admitted it behaved better than most of his drivers, and in a war defined by movement, its survival would matter far more than anyone realized. The opening months of the war exposed a problem the British Army had preferred not to admit aloud. Columns stretched across the roads of France like threads pulled too thin, and the vehicles meant to carry the weight of a modern expeditionary force were already struggling. Some were relics of the interwar years, worn down by parades rather than strengthened by purpose, and others were cobbled together from whatever civilian manufacturers still had capacity to spare. What the Army lacked was uniformity, standardization, and above all, a dependable light truck that could take punishment without complaint. The expeditionary force depended on mobility in a way its First World War ancestors never had. Divisions were expected to move fast, resupply on the march, and reposition before the enemy could close distance. Yet the logistical doctrine still rested on an assortment of lorries whose parts rarely matched and whose engines behaved with the temperament of overworked farm equipment. The Morris Commercial CS8 entered this picture not as a luxury or experiment, but as the answer to a genuine structural weakness in Britain's war machine. Its 15 CWT payload created a bridge between hand-carried infantry burdens and the larger, slower 3-tonners that could not maneuver near the line. Its compact frame allowed it to snake through village streets without tearing up pavements or knocking over signposts, a surprisingly important consideration in France's older towns. Strategists saw that the army needed a platform that was consistent, serviceable, and quick to manufacture. The CS8 offered a straightforward ladder chassis with enough strength to resist twisting under rough loads, and its 4x2 layout kept production simple at a moment when Britain was preparing for extended conflict. Spare parts could be exchanged between units because they finally belonged to a family rather than a collection of orphans held together by supply clerks' improvisation. It meant the difference between halting an advance due to broken suspension and simply swapping out a worn leaf spring from the next depot along the route. And though designers never intended it to be glamorous, the Morris filled a gap no other British vehicle covered so cleanly. Even quartermasters admitted, begrudgingly, that for once they had something that didn't need bribing with a spanner to behave. Its arrival eased the Army's growing strain and offered a foundation upon which a more mobile force could stand. The concept of the Morris CS8 did not emerge from a single dramatic moment, but from a quieter, more deliberate recognition within Britain's military and industrial circles. Officers had begun to realize that mobility in a new European war would rely not on brute force alone, but on vehicles that could adapt, endure, and be repaired quickly under field pressure. The War Office wanted a truck that was light enough for forward areas, yet strong enough to carry radios, section loads, ammunition boxes, or a fire team and their kit without sagging under the strain. It was logistics translated into engineering, and it needed a manufacturer accustomed to solving practical problems rather than chasing prestige designs. Morris Commercial already understood how to build trucks that behaved sensibly on poor roads. Their civilian fleets had earned reputations for predictable handling, and engines that preferred regular work to pampered idling. The Army wanted those strengths translated into a military pattern, stripped of frills, toughened for field life, and designed for rapid production using existing factory arrangements. To meet this, Morris engineers focused on a clean, open engine bay for straightforward maintenance, a robust six-cylinder side valve engine that delivered smooth torque, and a cab layout that gave drivers enough visibility to navigate crowded columns without scraping every passing wall. Debates surrounded its wheel configuration, with some officers advocating a 4x4 layout to keep pace with continental developments. But the War Office chose the 4x2 pattern because it simplified manufacturing and reduced the number of specialized components the supply chain would need to chase across Europe. The CS8 suspension, semi-elliptical leaf springs front and rear, was selected specifically because it handled uneven loads with predictable reactions, allowing it to serve as a general-purpose platform rather than a narrowly specialized vehicle. Standardization also meant firms beyond Morris could produce variants or parts without renegotiating every bolt and bracket. Its designers imagined a truck that could be built fast, driven hard, and understood instinctively by any trained soldier. That meant clear access to lubricating points, removable panels for field servicing, and wiring routes chosen with an eye to rapid replacement in foul weather. The Army wanted a truck that wouldn't intimidate new drivers, yet offered enough durability to withstand thousands of miles of poor roads. One inspector even noted that it was refreshing to test a prototype where the electrics didn't declare mutiny the moment it rained. In the end, the CS8 became a practical vision of military utility, an answer built not from glamour but from clarity of purpose, and from an understanding that war demanded vehicles which worked, not vehicles which impressed. Factories across Britain hummed with a new urgency as the Morris CS8 entered full-scale production. Assembly lines that had once turned out commercial delivery vans were reconfigured almost overnight, with jigs, presses and welding bays now dedicated to meeting the Army's rising demands. The goal was not artistic engineering, but repeatable, reliable construction, achieved through a combination of skilled labour and a parts philosophy that favoured simplicity everywhere it could be justified. Steel sheets were cut for the cab panels, frames were riveted and bolted together with industrial rhythm, and powertrains were married to chassis rails in a sequence refined for speed. One of the most significant triumphs of the build process was the use of standardized sub-assemblies. Engines arrived ready-tested, gearboxes were bench-aligned before fitting, and axles were checked for tolerances tight enough to prevent the chatter and vibration that plagued some competing lorries. This modularity reduced downtime during assembly and meant that a single rejected component did not halt the entire production line. It also meant that spares could be stocked widely. Every motor pool across Britain could recognise and fit the same parts without improvisation. The CS8's ladder chassis was deliberately open and accessible, giving mechanics easy routes to mounting points and lubrication areas. In practical terms, this meant a vehicle could be stripped for repairs far faster than heavier, more complex designs. The fuel system, gravity-fed from a scuttle-mounted tank, was chosen specifically because it required fewer moving parts and no complex pump arrangement. It was a design decision favouring battlefield resilience over refinement. Electrical harnesses, though basic, were routed along predictable paths, avoiding the hidden recesses that often turned maintenance into hide-and-seek with a screwdriver. Wartime shortages began to influence production by late 1940. Rubber, specialized alloys, and high-quality bearings all faced competing demands from other branches of the war economy. Morris responded with substitutions that maintained function without sacrificing reliability, alternative rubber mixes for bushings, revised steel compositions for certain brackets, and tighter inspection on components prone to accelerated wear. Wooden cargo bodies became increasingly common because timber supply remained steadier than steel allocation. Despite pressure, the consistency remained admirable. Workers took pride in knowing their efforts translated directly into mobility at the front, and the CS8's construction philosophy rewarded their discipline by keeping complexity low and throughput high. One fitter joked that the truck was so straightforward you could practically build one with a hammer, a spanner, and a pot of strong tea. And as completed CS8's rolled out of the factories, they represented not just machines but the culmination of an industrial system learning to run at wartime tempo. Trials began long before the Morris CS8 ever tasted the dust of France. Proving grounds in Britain offered every kind of terrain the War Office could muster: bog, chalk, gravel, steep banks, and stretches of road so pitted they resembled the surface of a neglected moon. Drivers were instructed to push the truck into situations no sane civilian operator would dare attempt. They crawled it up inclines that tested tyre bite and engine torque, dropped it into ruts deep enough to threaten the sump, and sent it rattling across washboard tracks to see what shook loose first. The CS8 responded with a mix of stubborn endurance and predictable mechanical behaviour. In these sessions, the six-cylinder petrol engine demonstrated its strength as a forward area workhorse. Its torque curve, gentle but steady, allowed the CS8 to pull loaded bodies through mud without stalling into embarrassment. The gearbox, 4 forward speeds and 1 reverse, proved surprisingly tolerant, provided the driver treated it with a degree of mechanical sympathy. Axle articulation showed its limits on heavily broken ground, a characteristic of the 4x2 layout, yet testers found that the vehicle compensated through a combination of momentum, balanced weight distribution, and tyres suited to rough roads. They noted that the CS8 did not excel at any single extreme, but it coped reliably with most, an attribute far more valuable than specialized brilliance in wartime transport. The cabin tests revealed ergonomic quirks that would later become part of its character. Drivers complained that the seating felt slightly elevated, giving the sensation of perching rather than sitting, yet this also granted visibility that proved advantageous in convoy movement. Noise and vibration were unavoidable, though far from intolerable. Windshield wipers, powered manually on earlier variants, proved adequate in drizzle but comically overwhelmed in heavy rain, a flaw corrected in later refinements. Steering remained pleasantly direct for a truck of its class, with a turning circle that allowed navigation through village squares without upsetting every market stall within reach. Operational trials simulated load conditions, and it was here that the CS8's practical virtues became most apparent. Ammunition crates, medical supplies, and radio equipment all rode with minimal drama. The truck balanced its weight cleanly, reducing the pitching and rolling that plagued some rivals. Even after long test runs, the engine temperatures remained stable thanks to a cooling system that behaved sensibly even under heavy strain. Soldiers warming to the vehicle left candid notes in trial logs. One supervisor remarked that the truck complained less than the men driving it, which immediately earned the CS8 unofficial approval. And while the test program uncovered limitations inherent to its design, it also confirmed that the Morris was precisely what the Army needed: reliable, adaptable, and uncomplicated to a degree that made it ideal for sustained operations in unpredictable conditions. When the Morris CS8 met the reality of frontline deployment, theory gave way to the unforgiving arithmetic of mud, weight, and distance. Northern France demanded rapid relocation of supplies under the constant threat of Luftwaffe attention, and the CS8 was thrust into roles far beyond its brochure description. It carried section loads one day, medical panniers the next, and hauled trailers whenever a heavier truck faltered. In these conditions, its strengths and flaws became equally clear, forming a portrait of a machine shaped not by engineering idealism, but by practical wartime experience. One of its most decisive advantages lay in its consistency across varied conditions. The six-cylinder engine, though modest in figures, produced a dependable flow of torque that allowed the truck to maintain progress even when columns were forced off paved routes. Its weight distribution helped it climb inclines without unsettling the chassis, and its steering remained workable even when roads narrowed to single-lane farm tracks. Drivers valued the predictability. They could judge its reactions with enough confidence to keep convoys moving under pressure, a factor that saved time in situations where minutes mattered more than perfect mechanical elegance. But the CS8 was not immune to difficulty. The 4x2 configuration revealed its limits in Belgium's softer ground, where heavier rains turned fields into traps capable of immobilizing anything without driven front wheels. Some units compensated by reducing loads, others used tow ropes as a matter of routine, and a few adopted improvised plank techniques to keep traction alive. This wasn't failure so much as a reminder of the design compromise Britain had accepted: simplicity over all-terrain performance. In return, the truck's lighter construction meant it consumed fewer spare parts and placed far less strain on overstretched maintenance sections. The vehicle's wooden cargo bodies also proved a mixed blessing. They resisted dents and could be repaired with basic carpentry rather than specialist welding, an enormous advantage when workshops were dispersed or retreating. Yet exposure to prolonged wet weather inevitably caused swelling, joint fatigue, and the occasional warped panel that needed evening out. None of this undermined the CS8's strategic value, but it added layers of work for units already juggling competing priorities. Where the truck undeniably broke through expectations was in its endurance over long marches. Cooling performance remained stable, even during back-to-back relocations that drained the stamina of men more quickly than machines. Electrical systems, though simple, held firm against vibration and jolting that often disrupted more sophisticated vehicles. In many formations, the CS8 became the quiet backbone of mobility because it simply kept turning its wheels when larger trucks refused to cooperate. And while the vehicle could not claim perfection, no wartime truck ever could, it carved out a reputation based on hard evidence of function rather than aspirational design. It earned the sort of grudging respect only a machine can win by surviving every unreasonable task handed to it. In a war defined by movement, the CS8 endured precisely because it delivered exactly what was needed, and nothing the battlefield didn't require. Beneath the immediate demands of retreat, reinforcement, and battlefield survival, the Morris CS8 exerted a quieter influence on the wider machinery of war. Its presence altered supply habits, changed planning assumptions, and forced logistical officers to rethink how Britain moved men and material through a conflict that sprawled across multiple fronts. At first glance, it was only a light truck, but its ubiquity created momentum within the supply chain that reached far beyond the places its wheels ever touched. One of the most significant consequences appeared in the realm of allocation. Because the CS8 used fewer specialized components than heavier lorries, workshops could streamline their inventories and maintain higher readiness rates without overburdening storage capacity. This meant reduced delays in repairs and improved vehicle availability across entire divisions. Simpler machines shaped simpler logistics, and simpler logistics meant units reorganized their planning cycles around vehicles they could trust to operate without extensive downtime. This effect compounded across months of deployment, improving consistency in unit mobility even as larger, more advanced vehicles experienced sporadic shortages in key parts. The truck also influenced the way supplies were packed and distributed. Quartermasters began dividing loads into smaller, more manageable consignments tailored to the CS8's 15 cw limit. This shift created a new rhythm in resupply convoys, favouring frequent, lighter movements instead of bulky, slower columns that risked creating bottlenecks or presenting large targets. In practical terms, the CS8 helped decentralise supply flow at a time when flexibility proved essential across shifting battle lines. Another hidden impact emerged in training and small unit coordination. Because the CS8 was straightforward to learn, units could rotate personnel through driving duties without disrupting operational tempo. This made companies more resilient to personnel losses and allowed commanders greater freedom in assigning tasks during demanding operations. The vehicle's predictable handling meant fewer accidents in congested retreat routes, scenarios where even minor mistakes could snarl entire convoys and jeopardize the movement of fighting formations. Its structural simplicity also encouraged a culture of field-level initiative. Soldiers routinely adapted its wooden bodywork for whatever purpose circumstances demanded: improvised ambulance, equipment hauler, or mobile repair rack. These modifications spread rapidly, carried by observation rather than official instruction. The CS8's design invited experimentation because it tolerated rough treatment and did not punish improvisation with catastrophic failure. Its influence grew not by command or decree, but by the unspoken rule that anything which made life easier under fire quickly became indispensable. The Morris CS8 shaped wartime behaviour in ways that were noticed only in hindsight, its legacy written into the efficiency and adaptability of the men who relied on it day after day. When the dust of wartime operations finally settled, the Morris CS8 lived on in workshops, depots, and remote postings long after newer vehicles began appearing on parade grounds. It remained woven into the landscape of Britain's post-war military infrastructure because its virtues did not fade with victory. Units still needed a light truck that could tolerate indifferent roads, hurried servicing, and the sort of everyday demands that never make it into official histories. The CS8, already proven in the harshest laboratory imaginable, continued doing its work without complaint. One of its most enduring contributions lay in the lessons it left behind. Engineers studying captured, damaged, or well-worn examples found consistent themes: a chassis that resisted fatigue better than expected, a powertrain that forgave imprecise maintenance, and a layout that encouraged straightforward troubleshooting. These insights influenced not just its immediate successors, but the broader British philosophy of building vehicles that prioritised access, reliability, and production efficiency over attractive complexity. The next generation of light trucks benefited from this pragmatism, incorporating improvements in suspension behaviour, axle clearance, and driver ergonomics that designers understood more clearly thanks to the CS8 service record. The truck also proved valuable in Commonwealth forces across developing theatres where infrastructure lagged behind demand. Its simple mechanical systems could be supported by small workshops with limited tooling, making it useful in territories rebuilding their transport networks after the upheavals of war. The vehicle's capacity for modification furthered its usefulness. Companies fitted it with improvised canopies, radio housings, cargo racks, and even rudimentary field kitchens depending on local needs. Its design adapted well because nothing in its construction resisted practical amendment. Restoration efforts in later decades revealed another aspect of its legacy: the durability of its central structure. Surviving chassis rails often required less remedial work than expected, allowing restorers to focus on bodywork, wiring, and trim rather than major structural renewal. For enthusiasts, this durability felt like a testament to wartime design restraint: strength where it mattered, simplicity everywhere else. And though it never enjoyed the fame of armoured vehicles or aircraft, its influence endured in the ways armies thought about mobility at the tactical level. It left behind the sort of quiet example that shaped expectations without shouting for attention. In manuals, workshops and training courses, the principles the CS8 embodied became reference points long after the last of the series left service. Its legacy lived on as a blueprint for practical military utility, a benchmark that showed how effectiveness could be achieved through clarity of purpose and honest engineering. The Morris CS8 began its story on muddy verges and narrow country lanes, places where modern warfare collided with the practical realities of movement. Its frame rattled under uneven loads, its panels shook with the tempo of rough roads, and its tires carved tracks through landscapes that shifted daily under the pressure of conflict. Yet, across all these conditions, it held to a simple mechanical rhythm, a rhythm that carried supplies, equipment, and men from one fragile position to the next. In the quiet aftermath of action, its persistence offered a reminder that wars are sustained not only by strategy or courage, but by the ordinary machines that keep an army in motion. Reflecting on its service reveals a pattern unchanged across generations. The value of a vehicle is often measured not by its dramatic capabilities, but by its availability at the moment it is needed most. The CS8's qualities were practical, functional, and unembellished, and these traits allowed it to remain present where the situation demanded presence above perfection. Its footprint on history lies in this constancy, the daily, unglamorous reliability that allowed larger efforts to proceed with confidence, knowing that the essentials would arrive when required. Technical studies of its preserved examples highlight details easy to overlook: the generous engine bay clearances that simplified repairs in harsh weather, the direct routing of wiring that saved precious minutes in troubleshooting, and the disciplined approach to weight that balanced payload against mechanical stress without overtaxing the chassis. These qualities, mundane at first glance, shaped the expectations placed upon later British utility vehicles, embedding efficiency and serviceability into design choices that continued long after the last CS8 was retired. The truck also provides a lens through which to assess the broader mechanics of wartime infrastructure. Its role in distributing loads, supporting communication detachments, and absorbing the strain of relentless relocation emphasized how decisive reliable transport becomes when the landscape itself forms part of the adversary. When roads vanished in rain or froze without warning, the CS8 kept its pace, allowing operations to continue despite obstacles that could not be resolved by planning alone. Its truth was always that effectiveness need not be dramatic to be essential. And as each remaining example stands quietly in collections or depots, its form tells a complete and unvarnished story of a machine that met its purpose faithfully in one of history's most demanding eras. The Morris CS8 remains a testament to the power of simple engineering used well, an unassuming vehicle that helped keep an army moving when movement mattered most,